the algorithms are, according to the people who wrote them, are saying, my gosh, this is causing us to radicalize because the algorithm is feeding people things that sell, which gets them spun up, you know. So particularly things that you know, radical stuff that get people upset, or that maybe, you know, attract them because they find people who are like-minded, and this is a real problem, and it's led to you know, an increase in addiction to devices, particularly among young people, and an increase in teenage suicide, and you know, some people think a real radicalization of the country, and partisan divide, all stimulated by these algorithms. And of course, that's a very dark unintended consequences of technology. But I'm here to tell you that I think there's good news, and I think that there is a lot of areas of technology that have the possibility of painting a very better picture of the future than the one we have now. But let me ask any of you, how do you respond to that? Do you feel good about the future, or not so good? And if you are worried about it, what are you worried about? Tell me. And don't be shy.
So I would say, I don't know, I have good days where I feel really good about things, and then days when I don't feel very good about things. But I think a lot of what's going on with just like on Facebook and all, like the fake news. I mean, there really is fake news, and people believe it. And people I know that are actually, what scares me is people that I feel are pretty intelligent, educated people are believing this stuff because it's really good. I mean, some of it is really good. They throw in a little bit of truth, and then people just go down this rabbit hole with, that's scary to me.
Well,
and what's kind of scary about that is that the algorithms of the, you know, big tech these days, whatever little rabbit hole you peek into, they just shove more and more and more and more of that at you, so that you suddenly are in this whole information bubble that's completely different from somebody else's information bubble.
yeah,
One, two.
Somebody probably needs to make sure you mute your mic when you're not talking, otherwise we can get feedback loops going here. So yes, and it is very subtle, and sometimes the things that the fake news that are kind of go with what you hear, you kind of wouldn't believe that. I remember one of the first times I realized that I was reading something that was kind of maybe picking up on a viewpoint I had, and I suddenly realized, wait a minute, this is too much. You know, this has gone too far. I don't believe that. But it takes quite a bit of discernment to realize that. And now this machine learning, as they call it, deep learning, statistical AI algorithms are, you know, processing natural language, and are able, they've created what is really these sort of like a super parrot. You know, I don't know if you've heard of this company called OpenAI, and they have something called the GPT-3 program, which by using statistics to be able to predict, if you give it a word, it can predict the statistical likelihood of what's the most likely word to precede it or to come behind it. And based on that, it can string together sentences that, because they're statistically good word combinations drawn from a huge database of text, trillions of samples in the database they train on, it sounds like a human talking, just like a parrot does sound like a human talking. But just like a parrot, it has absolutely no comprehension of what it's saying or what it means. But it's so good at it that you can give it a whole sentence, and it'll give you a whole paragraph. So that makes it so easy to create fake text and put it out there everywhere that it's really, a lot of people are really concerned about it. But on the other hand, the algorithm it's based on, and by the way, one of the Google ethicists, if you read this week, was fired because she came out with a document very, very critical, or a paper very, very critical of this. And it's now based on an algorithm that Google owns that's very important to them. And they don't want it kind of exposed. And so they fired her and created a big controversy. So there's a lot of, tech, is certainly a two-edged sword. And AI, of course, and I don't want to focus necessarily only on AI in this conversation, because as I said, there's four very interesting areas of human endeavor in technology going on right now, each of which has major impacts. And just to review those real quick before I get too sidetracked into AI, because obviously it's something I can talk about all night. They are AI, then space travel and space flight, and then advanced medicine, which is also leading us toward living longer lifespans. And it would be interesting to talk about that a little bit. And finally, what's called transhumanism. Does everybody know what transhumanism is? It's a little obscure. You never heard of those things. Okay, well, transhumanism, it's a real thing, but as a philosophy, it's maybe a little. Transhumanism is the idea that we could take our technology and use it on ourselves to change what we are. Okay, so what is it that makes human beings human and makes us different from the other species that we share this planet with, at least to a large extent, is we have the capacity to use to create knowledge, to build models of the world that work and allow us to give us power over nature. And so we've gone right out and we've created a world and an environment to live in, which is not the world that we evolved in, that we feel home at naturally. And so now we're living in a world that we don't really feel at home in at all, right? So that's a fundamental problem that we have. But now, with the science we have, we can alter what we are. So we can, quote, make us more than human in some way. Now, at the very simplest way of that is like the $6 Million Man. Remember that old TV show where they gave him robotic legs and eyes, and so he was a transhuman. He was enhanced to be. So the first thing you can think about is hardware, better hardware than we already have. And I guess someone told me what the acid test is to know whether you are spiritually or psychologically a transhumanist is, would you cut off a perfectly healthy natural leg to replace it with a bionic one, or bionic legs that will allow you to run 50 miles an hour, or even live longer. So I don't know if I go there, but so transhumanism, but then that leads on to the other idea of longevity. And a lot of people have different ideas about that. But what I'm talking about is, what if we didn't grow old anymore? All right, what if we stayed young and vigorous? Now, would that make us immortal? No, sooner or later, you're going to get run over by a truck if you live long enough. I mean, sooner or later, it doesn't make you immortal, but you could live a very long time. And some people say, oh, I don't, it doesn't appeal to me. It appeals to me. and one of the reasons it does is, as I've gotten older, I look back at my younger self and I think, what an idiot. No, maybe not that bad, but I think, well, I've learned a lot. And it seems to me that the older I get, the more I've learned. And at my age, I'm beginning to think, well, I've got way more life behind me than I have ahead of me. And isn't that kind of too bad? Because I'm just starting to figure out how things work around here. And so I think, the human condition, it's not tragic that we die, but I think we all die too young. I think if we had much more time we'd have more time to grow wise. And I think that would have a profound impact on human culture. So I'm rooting for that one. That's not one that I'm involved in. But it's a nice intro to another one that I am involved in, and that's spaceflight. And because the first thing that most people ask when we talk about living indefinite lifespans is, where are we going to put all the people? Okay. And to me, I've never worried about that, because there's a whole universe out there and a whole solar system out there. And there's technology to build wonderful habitats that are very Earth-like. And so I don't think there's always place to put people. There's other planets, there's the moon, there's the stars someday with planets around them. So there's an infinite universe out there. Are you shaking your head, Anna? Do you disagree with that scenario?
No, oops, I'm trying to, am I, okay. No, I was just gonna say, like, how do you make, I mean, I feel like Earth is so perfect. How can you even like replicate that?
Well, a lot of work has been done on that. And it actually goes back to the late 60s. There was a guy named Jared O'Neill, who's a Princeton professor. And he gave his class the task of imagining building, say, a colony in space, floating in space. But he said, make it a place people would want to live. Yeah. And they got to work and they designed these structures. Just picture this, there's a million variations of it. But they make it, a particular cylinder, 20 miles long and about 5 miles in diameter. So you fill it, and it's made out of alternating panels, transparent and solid. And on the solid ones, you put dirt and you build mountains and roads and trees. And you craft it, fill the air, craft the ends, and then put on the solid ones or the opaque ones, you make them land and also waters and lakes. The transparent ones is for the sunlight to come in. You spin the whole thing so that you have centrifugal force gives you gravity. And then you can make it like anything you want. You can make these into giant gardens or beautiful cities. There's really no end to the architecture and art that these could be home to, and each one could be home to millions of people. And then you can learn how to mass produce these things and send them off throughout the solar system. So no, I mean, and even imagining habitats like that you build on the Earth or put them on this floating on the sea or under the sea. We've got nothing but room.
One of the things that I have a little bit of skeptical feelings about that, I would hate to see that scenario before we work through our human nature to master and dominate, because I think we just create, more and more and more chaos elsewhere and create a planet for the poor on Earth and these luxury condos in the sky.
Well,
some of what actually the reason I've been so excited about New Sapiens is the idea that some of the technology that you're working on could actually raise the standard of living for everyone on the planet, kind of like from the David Attenborough. Another great Netflix documentary is David Attenborough, who's just showed what we've done to the Earth in his 93 years or whatever. And it's really depressing. And at the very end, he says, well, the one hope is to figure out a way to raise the standard of living for everyone without it having a huge impact on the planet, which is, I know, what you imagine that, the New Sapiens technology could do. And in that scenario, I could see having space stations that are, I can see that as being a good thing. Without that, I would be very, I would just think, okay, humans are just going to go make a mess somewhere else.
Well, I mean, that's the dystopian view, okay, of space colonies. In fact, there was a movie about that. I forgot what it was called, Elysium, I think, where there was a beautiful colony in the world.
And I say that as an optimistic person. I'm a very optimistic person, but I still feel like we have to somehow kind of shift something really basic.
Well, I actually disagree with you about that in terms of that's probably what would happen. But but let's shift over to the other side, because all these things are all happening together, really. Okay, so then we shouldn't take any of these things in isolation or assume that going from A to B along this path, that the other paths aren't changing at the same time. So let's talk about that notion of productivity and wealth. That is, in a world in which everybody's standard of living has been raised to a very high to a high level. And what would that require? Well, vast wealth, but that would be vast wealth. It would be so much wealth in terms of material things that many things like the basic necessities of life would be so abundant to be virtually free. So how could that come about? Well, I foresee that coming about inevitably based on the kind of technology that we're working on today in my company, which is the kind of artificial intelligence that we all have been waiting for. I have, anyways, when I was, a child, many decades ago. The science fiction stories had robots in them, and these robots were intelligent robots, and they could speak and understand our language, and we could tell them what we wanted them to do, and they would be smart enough to understand what we want, and they would go off and do it for us. And what would that take? Well, it would take combining human-like intelligence with the power of machines. So machines, of course, is things that we build to amplify our natural powers. And initially we built them to amplify our muscles. And now we're starting to, only in the last few decades, we've been able to build machines that can amplify some of our mental capabilities, like arithmetic. Does anybody remember mechanical adding machines? You punch the numbers in and put a handle, and it would add up a big number for you. Better than most humans could do. Better than I could do, certainly. So, but now then we got computers. I guess you could call that a computer, but then we had electronic computers and digital computers and microprocessors, and they got really, really good at math. And now they can do really good at other things that humans do, and even better. They can play the game of Go or Jeopardy, and they call that AI. I guess, well, I know why they call it AI, because they base the programming algorithm on a neural network, which is the physical structure of our brain. So in kind of I think it's magical thinking, but they think, well, it's because we're using the same paradigm, programming paradigm based on neural networks. Someday this is going to be the kind of intelligence that we recognize as intelligence, which is understanding language and being able to understand the world. Now, what is that? That's knowledge. So today, everything they call AI has no knowledge in it at all. That algorithm that can mimic human speech, like a parrot, has no knowledge in it. And knowledge is like an internal world that we live in that has that's a good enough model of the real world that we can try things out in our model internal world, and they work in the real world. So I don't have to go out and experiment about what would happen if I jumped off the top of the Empire State Building. My knowledge of what happens is sufficient to predict that reality without testing it. So that's what we want. That's what AI would be. And that's the approach that we took at my company, New Sapience. We turned the whole thing around and said, instead of trying to build an artificial brain, which is essentially what everybody else is doing, that's a really hard problem. An artificial human brain, especially, because our brain kind of diverged in its mental processing capabilities from the other species in this planet about 4 million years ago, and we've developed this very unique capability to create these internal models, which is knowledge. So if you could put knowledge in a computer, that is the path that's going to lead to the kind of real, general, everyday intelligence that that we were looking for. And we've actually done that, and it works very well. It wasn't easy, and it came about through a lot of very unusual insights about the nature of knowledge, about the nature of what knowledge is. Turns out knowledge, underneath of it, as knowledge has a hidden structure, the way material has a hidden structure, in that there's only so many kinds of atoms. So we figured out we've discovered what those kind of atoms of knowledge are and how you can put them together. So it was as big a breakthrough. It's bigger breakthrough, really, but it allows us to do in computers. It's such a breakthrough. It was the same as a breakthrough between alchemy and chemistry, when the periodic table said, oh, there's only so many atoms and they can only be combined in certain ways. So what the gist of that was, we found a way to create knowledge in machines and write some logic to think about it. We gave them something to think about. And we're on the path to that kind of general intelligence. And we see just a few years from now that increasing our productivity, being able to do things that human beings find difficult or tedious, and do it as well or better. And there's really no limit to that. So eventually we will put these, we call them sapiens. These are these, a sapien, our definition of sapien is a computer that can use knowledge in the same sense that humans can use knowledge. So we put our core into these computers and they become sapiens, able to think about things in the same sense we think about them, and to communicate with us using language in the same sense that humans communicate using language. And what I mean by that is the difference between what interacting with something like Siri and interacting with one of our sapiens. And Bill here just showed me a video of he has a sapiens, he's one of our testers, and he put together a little movie that will be available. I don't want to take too much time with it right now, but if I told Siri, I'm hiding the keys to my safe deposit box in a shoebox on the top shelf of the hall closet, Lord knows what you'd get out of it. It would find something on, I think the last time I tried that, it said, I found a locksmith near you. Okay, so that's not exactly communicating using human language the way humans communicate human language. But if I tell my sapiens that and come back later, maybe a year from now, and say, where is the key to the safe deposit box? It would faithfully say, it's in a shoebox on the top shelf in the hall closet. And we were demonstrating that now. In fact, we have about 20 people using our prototype sapiens, and some of them, particularly people who take a lot of medicines. My wife was one of those people, and she uses it every day. Did I take my medicine A or did I take my medicine B? Because she forgets. And then, oh my gosh, did I take it or not? I have the same problem. Did I take my metformin? So if you just get in the habit of saying, I'm taking my metformin now, G sapien, that releases you from that suffering right there. And that's just the beginning. I might say that our sapiens today maybe have an IQ of 40 because they're not real knowledgeable about the world. They've got a vocabulary today, kind of like a first grader, but they don't understand it as well as even a first grader might. But so I would say their IQ is more like a Labrador Retriever's now. But they're talking Labrador Retriever, they never forget stuff. So we're very excited about this. We don't see any limitation to how far we're going to be able to enhance the basic understanding and knowledge of this technology, which means in a few years, we will be putting them into robots. And a few years after that, those robots will be doing the jobs we don't like to do, like manufacturing and mining and the hard jobs in agriculture. And they'll be producing all the necessities of life, and they'll be maintaining themselves and building new robots. And eventually, what does that mean? It means the cost of the human involvement to build these things is going to zero, which means productivity has become infinite, which means, again, you can envision a scenario, and not many years down the road, one that we can, very well, even without super longevity coming along and giving us super long lifespans, I think in just, we will all live, with any luck at all, live to see that day. And it's going to be, it's going to be a bumpy ride getting there, of course. But because it's going to, it's a different order. But if imagine a society which,
one thing that I think is really interesting is that, I mean, you're not the only futurist talking about us getting to this era of humanity where all, stuff is free. There's another very well-known economist. His name is Jeremy Rifkin. He's written a number of best-selling books. A really interesting one is called Zero Marginal Cost Society. And he talks about the same thing. And he didn't see your technology coming. Like, he didn't even see that. He saw just the evolution of 3D printing and the internet. I mean, we're already seeing it with things like the sharing economies that have been burgeoning in the last 20 years. He saw that too. And I think between what he's talking about and what, you're developing, I think, sure, there can be some bumps along the way, but it's almost like the kind of technology that's just going to take the wind out of the sails of capitalism and even socialism and a lot of the economic systems.
well, it will certainly
by now.
It will certainly alter them beyond. When I said it's an order, it will alter them into something other than what they are now. And those terms, as we use them today, we will have a future economic system that neither of those words accurately can describe.
They're not
today.
relevant anymore.
They're not relevant anyway. And that's something I've seen again and again. I mean, as I think about the future, and I think about all these trends coming together, so many of the things that we say these are the pillars of our society today, they're still there, but they're in very altered form. I think we will redefine what we mean by terms, redefine what we mean and understand, say, education to be, what we understand the economy to be, what we understand government and law to be. All of these things will be redefined in a new way, and that fits together. But all must fit together. That's why they all need to be pieces of a puzzle, and the puzzles have to fit. And that's why it's so hard to say, just take everything by itself and say, oh, well, okay, think about space colonies and say, well, that isn't going to work. Well, space colonies aren't going to happen, from where we are today. Everything else is changing along with them. And so yes, in a society where, who's going to build all those space colonies? Well, it's probably going to build these robots, and they're not going to cost anything because they'll be the ones mining the stuff on the moon. So people can go to them, not just the rich. Everybody will be able to go to them.
So I have a question.
Yes,
Hi, this
Stacey.
is Stacey from Baltimore. I don't know. It's hard for me to picture this future that you're describing if these sapiens are sort of taking over the jobs. I mean, so what will people do?
Well, that's a very good question. That's an excellent question.
The second question is, this seems very, very, very in contradiction to natural law. Like the idea of being able to live forever just seems very, very different than the cycle of life. And we come and we go and we change and we shift, and there's spring and there's summer and there's fall and there's winter, and everything just is coming and going. We don't just go into summer and just stay there forever. It just seems very strangely at odds with what's going on with nature as we know it. And then I guess those are two completely separate questions. Like, okay, so let's say, I'm not going to go to my job anymore because a sapien is doing my job. So, I mean, ideally, I'm thinking, well, we can all just be, we can all do art. And
Stacey, you're throwing out a lot of stuff. Okay, but as far as can't be summer forever, tell that to the Tahitians. They don't seem to mind. But I'm not talking about changing our nature, human nature. Now that's what the transhumanists may talk about, and I'm deeply skeptical, Chen. I might go for bionic eyes, but you know, I don't think we ought to mess with our nature. I don't think we ought to mess with our spiritual, psychological, mental apparatus. One reason we barely got figured out how to use it. You know, we're just learning. You know, it's got a potential. We have the human experience. We have a potential for experiencing things as human beings that we haven't even begun to plumb, as I believe it, without changing that. But here's the deal. I mean, yes, we are cyclical creatures. We do, you know, we do recognize the cycles, and there will be a circle of life. I'm not talking about changing that. I'm just talking about a bigger circle. but and I don't, you know, and I think there's great advantages to that. But what I see the overall challenge, and this is what I was getting at, putting all this together, and it's directly relevant to what you're saying. Putting all this together, I said we're going to end up redefining what we mean by education and the way we rear our children and the concept of law and commerce, and all these things are going to change. But here's the trick. You know, what all the problems we have, I mean, really are because we're natural beings, the laws of nature, as you say, but it's really as they apply to us. I mean, we can't change the overall laws of nature, but we are natural creatures. I deeply believe that the challenge and the task for all of us and for us as a species is to understand ourselves and our nature as it evolved back in nature, okay, over those 4 million years, and find a way to craft this external environment. Now we have control over the environment we are in. Can we craft a society, an environment, a habitat that allows us to still be our natural being, natural humans, and feel like natural humans, and still have the benefits of these technologies? Because when we were still living in the jungle, as it were, or living in nature, and by the way, 4 million years to become human, to diverge from other animals that are our cousins. But we just came out of that society, that world at the end of the Upper Pleistocene, or the beginning of the Upper Pleistocene, whatever that was, just a few 100,000 years ago. I think 160,000 years ago. And in civilization, only, what, 8,000 years ago, we are just walked out the door of the world that we evolved in to a world that we created. And we're just not very good at it right now, okay?
Well,
we haven't done a good job yet.
I think that when we don't have to go to a job to survive, I think the transition, and yeah, you know, transitions are rocky. I mean, look what we're in the midst of right now, just in the minutia of just even dealing with the weird political stuff we're in the midst of. Transitions are really rough, but I think there's a way that we have an opportunity to evolve from a species that's always been about survival to one that is about thriving.
And that's
and really, you know, self-actualizing.
so.
And you know, I think that if there isn't such an agenda about survival, I think even things like greed will start to dissipate, because greed is just that, you know, that need to have more that comes from a collective feeling that there's never enough for everyone. I mean, what would happen if there was plenty for everyone? I mean, I think that would fundamentally change who we are.
One of the things that I've really enjoyed about the work I do, and it really struck me, I went to a futurist conference about 10 years ago, and there were all these geeks running around, you know, talking about statistics and, you know, and programs and all this stuff. And yet, you know, they were all talking about AI, and there was this underlying question that people were asking, that if you can build machines that will do anything you ask them to do, what is it that you want them to do? And what is it that you don't want them to do for you? You know, so you see, some of them are easy. I don't want them to take my vacation for me, as if I took vacations, but you know, I want to do that for myself. So the very fact that you can have machines do stuff for you, you are forced to say what you don't want them to do for you, which is to say you're forced to ask what you want to do for yourself, which is you're forced to say, what is the meaning of my life? Okay, what is really that matters to me that I want to experience? And again, as Lynn was saying very, very eloquently, you know, self-actualizing. If you don't have to go 9 to 5, you don't have to be in that rat race, what does your life look like? And if all these resources are there for you, what are you going to do with them? Now, some people say, oh, you know, in this direction, but work is the making of us. Yeah, the work is, but what is work? I mean, work is when you have a vision of something you want to create. Work is for you, it's what gives you energy. It inspires you. That's your work. You know, it's not, you know, it's not.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that we wouldn't have structure in our lives and chosen activities that we, you know, are passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the attraction of the land of the lotus eaters, and you know, I suppose that there would be people in that world who didn't, you know, when everything is a given, would just sit under the. I mean, that's fine too. They want to sit under the bo tree and contemplate, you know, nirvana, or maybe they're going to plug themselves into a video game, and that world's more important to them than the external world. That's their choice.
But people do that now.
They do that now anyway. I think less people would do it because they would have more opportunity. I think a lot of time people flow into those artificial realities because the reality they live in every day is grim because they're in boring thing.
Mm-hmm.
And for instance, you know, the things that disappear. Lynn was talking about greed. You know, I don't think that laziness is a real thing because I think laziness is how you feel about work you're not invested in. Okay, it's other people's work that you're doing because they are invested in it, but you're not invested in it, so you're not motivated.
Say, Bryant, I feel like Tiffany had a comment, and I feel like you're sitting on stuff, Tiffany. Can we give you a moment to speak?
So I know we're talking about technology, and at first I was shy to say anything because I wasn't sure how the workforce would fit into it. And now that we've been talking about it, I'm like, okay, I should have said something.
Okay.
But it does feel like since quarantine, having lost a job and come back to it again, it feels like in a weird way I've gone backwards. And I've noticed like a lot of people have been trying to build their own sort of income through online endeavors, drop shipping, things like that. But, you know, I feel like as a generation, like I'm in between Gen X and millennium or millennials. So I see the value in work because of the value my parents put into that. And that's, you know, what they did. They were 70s, like early 70s babies. So that's just kind of the foundation that they kind of grew up on. And my dad is still that way, but I can see him feeling bored with the drudgery of the 9 to 5, but not really knowing what to do next. And he's actually pretty into AI. And then for me and my brother, who's a 2000 child, he loves video games. That's his escape. And he's been very, very sensitive when it comes to the workforce and the structure that we've been given for the workforce. I've been able to deal with it, not because I want to, but because I'm like, what else am I supposed to do? The same with college. Like I went through the school system because I didn't see any other route. Every other route seemed like a risk, a rebellion against the structure, again, that we were given. So, you know, I'm at a point though where I don't see the 9 to 5 being beneficial to us on a soul level. Like it feels like I'm clocking in my soul and then I get it back after 5:30 and then by then I'm exhausted or, you know.
You're absolutely right. I totally agree with you. I mean, one of the blessings I've had in my life, for most of it, I've done work that really motivates me. And but partly that's, you know, I end up being an entrepreneur and I haven't worked for anybody else I worked in companies that I founded since 1989. So, I mean, that's very liberating. And I see, you know, as part of my vision of what these technologies, and particularly the kind of AI we're building, is going to do is allow people to, you know, all be entrepreneur, one or two or three. I mean, small groups, individuals and small groups, if they are, you know, empowered, enabled, have the resources they need, you know, are not oppressed by the outside world in any way for any reason, they can do amazing things because they go where what gives them energy, and they do their best. I figured that out a long time ago, that 90% of what we call talent is really interest. Okay. And if you're interested in something, it's going to absorb you, you're going to give it your best, you're going to be good at it, and you'll probably so good at it that people will pay for what you do. And that's, I think, as a general principle, I think that's very, very sound. You know, we talked about the relationship to work. Well, I was born half at the midpoint of the last century in 1950. And when me and my brothers and sisters were children in the 1950s, and we had great parents, but they discouraged us from studying musical instruments because they thought we might have talent. And if we had talent, we might end up being starving magicians, you know? So they met with all good intentions, and they weren't wrong. Okay, you know, they didn't want to see me, you know, see us sitting on a street corner and playing the flute with a hat in front of us. You know, that's not what that wasn't their hope for us. So wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if what you did for your children was really help them self-actualize, call you one, if you're into Joseph Campbell like me, follow your bliss, but, you know, find out what is for you. And, you know, I was fortunate, and maybe because I was structured my whole life for so long, raised my daughter that way. She never saw the inside of a school. Okay. She was blessed, you know, with, you know, she was privileged. We had money, but, you know, she educated herself, find out what she wanted to do, went off and did it, and didn't need all that structure. She wasn't being groomed to fit in a big structure. And by the way, you know, getting into education, I've studied a lot of that in the past. Maybe one reason I was interested in it, but our school systems, you know, with the little desks in a row and the columns in the rows, and the flag and the government symbols in the back of the room, and everybody stands in line and has to raise their hand to go to the bathroom. You know where that came from? It came
Russia?
from Prussia, close.
Prussia.
That was the Prussian model. And it was designed explicitly to train, the way people train neural networks, train people to be good factory workers or to go into the military. And that's the model that we use on our children today. And it's nuts, I think, but I digress.
Yeah, you think that's why, like, kids with more energy, they're labeled certain medical terminologies, and so they seem almost out of line with...
I don't want to get okay. I don't want to get too radicalized here, but
right,
you know,
that's a whole different hour and a half.
But if you got this young animal full of energy sitting in a chair, you know, looking out the window, and they want to be out there in nature, and so you say you got ADD and you drug them.
Yeah, that was me.
But they do.
Yeah.
That was.
My parents didn't agree with the drugs, but my kindergarten teacher was like, she has ADHD, and my mom's like, you're not a doctor, and she's 4, so.
I mean, there may be a real phenomenon.
You want to read up a little bit on Waldorf education. Because it's all about having little kids use their body, you know, because they're not ready to just sit and intellectualize. You might find that really interesting.
Yeah. Thank
Well,
you.
you want to, I can't resist telling this story because it's so radical, it'll blow you away. So I was raising my daughter with her mother, and we kind of got into this notion of organic self-directed learning. So, and she was a bright little girl, and she was talking a blue streak and all that. And so we didn't teach her how to read. We figured we'd teach her how to read when she wanted to learn. She loved books, you know? So we would read her and she would sit down. And of course I was an entrepreneur, off busy all the time. So it was a great time with that, with reading the book. So 5 years came along and no interest in reading. 6, you know, no interest in reading. 7, no interest in reading. You know, my mom would call me up and say, "She reading yet?" You know, so, but we were like, you know, trying to have the courage of our conviction. And it took, she's 11 years old. Supposedly she can't read. Now, she doesn't go to school, so, you know, it's our little secret. But, so we're reading our book. I mean, I think we're like halfway through volume 18 of the Animorphs series or something. And nobody was there to read to her. And she said, "Oh, heck," and picked it up and started reading it. Now, this is 2 months later. We gave her a standardized reading test and she scored at a graduate level. I'm not kidding. She knew how to read. I mean, she already had mastered language long ago. And,
But you know,
but without the benefit of an
thing,
institution.
that whole thing you were talking about interest, because that was my story too. I was like really, really bad at reading until I hit about age 11. I was like, had a really depressing, I was a totally depressed kid. I found my mom's bookshelf. I started pulling out the more adult novels and reading them for the sex scenes.
Yeah.
And man, I went through books, you know, this thick that my 7th grade teacher said, "She really shouldn't be reading that. That's not appropriate." My mother said, "Leave her alone." So
Well,
yeah, I really
I
get
learned,
it.
you know, I had dyslexia and I didn't learn to read very fast either, but I did learn to read, you know, in the 2nd or 3rd grade. And I learned a lot in elementary school from reading books. The problem for me was, it was awkward. The awkwardness was, is I was reading books that I wanted to read, which I had placed inside of the book that they had given me to read. You know? So, you know, I was always never reading the books I was supposed to read. And then I got, you know, caught in the 8th grade reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, you know, in the 8th grade class. So anyway, yeah, the world we live in and the world we've institutionalized for ourselves isn't probably the world that we ought to be living in. I mean, we've kind of messed it up for a lot of reasons, but there's huge hope out there for that. And these technologies are going to change the ground rules, going to change the parameters within which we are living. And, you know, in terms of this productivity business, and, you know, we say that tech makes us productivity, but, you know, all this quote AI, it's supposed to be making us an exception. I'm not talking about the AI that we're doing. I'm talking about machine learning, the big, you know, the Netflix type algorithms. That type of AI is supposed to make us productive, but it hasn't. It hasn't made us more productive. Productivity has actually been drifting down. That is the increased rate. We were increasing our productivity 1 or 2, 4% a year for decades, but it's been drifting down for the last 60 years. And then the last decade, it's cratered. The increase, we're hardly increasing in our productivity at all. And, you know, I can almost relate to that with just in technology. I mean, some of it's great. I mean, for a dyslexic, the spell checker is like heaven. But, you know, 20 years ago, you know, I had my Microsoft computer and I had all the apps and they all worked together and it was all the one ecosystem. And, you know, it was you learn it and you're done. And it was made me more productive. But today, you know, I've got an iPhone and I got the Apple ecosystem over there and I still work on a PC and then we use all this Google stuff for work. All these ecosystems of technology, all fighting for each other and all fighting for you. It's like the Tower of Babel again. It's not making us more productive. So again, you know, that's what we're excited about. We're building this thing called the Companion Sapien, which is going to be with you. You know, give it a name. It'll be yours. It won't steal your data. In fact, it'll be unable to do that. It will save your information. It'll protect others from getting that information. And it's going to be designed to help an individual be more productive. And if you think about it, something like that can understand what you tell it it's it's going to replace all those apps. It's the one app to rule them all, because you don't need contacts, you don't need calendars, you don't need notepads, you don't need any of those things. You're just chatting away with your secretary, and it doesn't forget a thing you tell it.
The other thing that's so exciting about it, we were talking earlier about the algorithms that, the Facebook and all the social media platforms basically exist to sell advertising and, to use us to buy product and manipulate us accordingly. But what New Sapiens is primed to become is a whole different kind of social media platform, among other things, that will, screen out bots, screen friends, have no advertising, have no agendas, no algorithms to push you, steer you toward anything. I mean, this is kind of crazy to think about, but it's going to really pull all the steam out of big tech. I mean, it's kind of almost scary to think about how much it's going to dissipate a lot of how big tech now makes their money. But it's going to be that kind of experience where we don't have those algorithms that keep pushing us deeper and deeper and deeper into polarized perspectives.
So we have this vision for Sapiens that we've been developing over the years, but already there are a few of them out there. Bill has one, and given it a name. Now, again, it's kind of like a talking Labrador Retriever right now, but it's going to get smarter and smarter and smarter, and it's going to keep remembering what he tells it. And 10 years from now, it may have a human level intelligence. In fact, I think it'll happen sooner than that. It's going to still remember everything and be able to even look back on what you told it years ago and see it from a more adult perspective, more intelligent.
Well, here's the question: when will this be available?
Well, we're hoping.
How far away are you?
Well, it's been 15 years in terms of the R&D part, but we're really in the production part now. We're quote alpha testing this thing. We could have it out there that you could just buy a subscription to one and have your first Sapien in as little as a year from now, and then you'll have it forever. And with each year goes by, we feel it will change your life more and more. And imagine 25 years from now, or imagine how much having a companion like that would change your life. And it's going to get more and more human-like. We're not making artificial humans, but what we are working to do is to program it and to build that model so that it gets humans. It understands from the standpoint of knowledge and logic, human wants, needs, and desires. So it's like, bye, Stacy. Thanks for spending some time with us. So it's like, it could be like the world's best therapist in a way, because it would get you, but it's not involved, okay? It's always logical. It would be like having a best friend who's always there for you, but was like, Mr. Spock, always logical, always objective. It's one of the cool things about our technology is you can't give it bias. That's really an amazing attribute about it. What do you mean you can't give it bias? Because it knows it's programmed into the way we've modeled the world. It knows the difference between the things that exist in themselves and how we perceive them. And it knows the difference between our perceptions of the world and our feelings about those. And it knows the difference between our feelings about the world or about our perceptions and our thoughts about them. So if I say, oh, the Empire State Building is an awesome building, our Sapiens learns that it's a building with a proper name, and that I respond or experience awe when I consider that building, because the word awe or awesome maps into a concept in our world model, which is an experience that can only happen inside a human being, one human being at a time. So that's what it learns. So if I say, Chinese are awful people, same thing. It's not going to learn that Chinese are awful people. It's going to learn that I feel that they're awful people. So it doesn't, you can't, if human beings were that clear about making that distinction, but we're not. You know, we confuse symbols for the thing that they're symbols of. We can certainly confuse perceptions for the things they're perceptions of. In fact, it took a great deal of insight in philosophy before anybody even recognized that perceptions are clearly different than the things perceived. Like a cardinal is a red bird, right? Red's property of the cardinal, yeah, except in the dark, right. So, I mean, perceptions are not the thing, they're different. Our sapiens understand that difference too. So, and it can't not. It's how these ideas are put together. So all the building blocks are already categorized, you know, how they can come together.
So here's another question. This sounds kind of too amazing to be true. How come we haven't heard of this before? Like what, you know, I know you, I've known you for years and years and years. I've been studying what you do. I kind of know that this is different from anything out there, but it sounds like almost too big to be real. How come nobody has heard about this?
Okay, well, that's a good question. Well, the reason no one's hearing about it now or hasn't heard about it yet, one reason they haven't, is you just mentioned a little earlier how this is going to disrupt big tech. So we're kind of laying low for until we get to the market. We've been raising money from small investors a little bit at a time. We're keeping a low profile, but that wasn't your real question. Your real question is, why are these couple of guys and this guy in a boat, you know, how could you succeed? Why not at solving this problem, which frankly, you know, artificial general intelligence, as some people call it, is also considered the thing, the problem, the holy grail of computing. How could you solve it and not some genius at MIT or, you know, Beidou in China or all these other things? Well, the answer's not that amazing, but it's somewhat interesting. I mean, one, I should point out that the really truly innovative ideas are born in one human brain at a time, okay? Newton didn't have a giant research lab behind him, right? And neither did Aristotle. So that's not too amazing. But in the case of, people say, what makes you so smart, Bryant? Well, I always say, well, I'm not smart. It's just I have this very good model that I've been working on my whole life. But in fact, there's a rather unique path. The reason we succeeded is something to do with my own story. So, you know, I went to this interesting school called St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, and where we studied the great books and we studied philosophy and we read Aristotle and Plato and we talked about you know, the world models that the ancients had and the model world model. And I got real interested reading these philosophers over the course of 4 years. How do we know what we know? What is knowledge? So, and I realized that we were wrong about what knowledge was always considered to be a true fact. And so the whole body of knowledge was considered to be a big pile of facts. And I realized, no, it's how you connect them together that makes them a model, it makes them a structure that makes it work. So that was kind of a radical departure. And that's something that, you know, I guess I could have pursued, but instead of being a philosopher, I went off and took a totally different turn. I became a Navy pilot and flew airplanes around the Bermuda Triangle for years. And then I decided I wanted to get into the space business, and I went and got a master's in space systems engineering and got to working on spacecraft and went in the Hubble Space Telescope Mission Operations Center that was working there before it launched. And our job was to fly the spacecraft. And I had been flying airplanes, and now I went in the control center and I said, this is how you're flying the spacecraft? You're looking at all these numbers on screens. It's like a science project. And so that's where I got interested in AI. But I saw it as a problem of getting knowledge that I had in my head. I knew what the numbers meant because I'd studied it. You know, I learned that through, you know, through formal education and practice and studying the documentation, I knew what the numbers meant. But looking at them in real time while the spacecraft is spinning around in space, I said, that's nuts. We've got to get combine the computer's power of reasoning, and computers were all about logic. And I need to give them the knowledge in my head and get them into the computer. So I took that tact. And that's why I went down a road toward AI, which was not about building artificial brains or some esoteric algorithms, but by building a structure of information in the computer that corresponded to the structure of knowledge in the human mind. So it was all about knowledge. It was all about building that structure. And that's why I went down the road. And that fit in really well with the idea I had about what knowledge was, that it wasn't just a bunch of facts, but it was a structure which was a function as a model. So, and in the course of doing that, I launched my first company, and that went off and did some stuff and didn't quite solve the problem. My second company, which was all about spacecraft, by the way, space automation, so I actually became a rocket scientist. We launched rockets with this cool new technology eventually, which was based on finding a way to put knowledge into the computer. And based on that, I was able to say, can we generalize a model? It was started out as a model of a spacecraft, but a model of the everyday world. And that's when we really discovered that hidden structure. And I had to go all the way back. And I actually found part of the thing that really helped me. I don't tell this to everybody, but part of the thing that helped us figure out that periodic table, and especially the parts that might correspond to the columns, was in a book that Aristotle wrote. So it worked beautifully. And I don't know why Aristotle wrote that book, but he surely wasn't trying to solve AI. But it worked. It was his observations about what we can say about things. So a little bit of rocket science, a little bit of ancient wisdom, but that's not an everyday story. That's not how people have been doing AI. So I say, well, I'm not so smart. I didn't figure out anything that any other epistemologist / Navy pilot / rocket scientist / entrepreneur could figure out. Okay, anybody who did that, anybody could do that. But that's why nobody else has done it. There's just not a lot of tech people running around. Does that answer your question, Lynn? It's a long-winded answer.
Bryant?
Yeah.
How complete do you feel like your kind of periodic table of knowledge is? Are you just figuring out pieces of it and they still need to be put together, or do you feel like it's pretty complete?
It's very solid. It's absolutely solid enough to go as far as we need to go for quite a few years. We've actually figured out what are the fundamental concepts. We haven't figured out all of them, but we certainly have the critical mass of them. And what I mean by fundamental concepts, just like the fundamental atoms for which the material world is made of, there are a certain number. And the number of them is not, there's two aspects of it. One is the fundamental building blocks of all knowledge. And then there's, on top of that, we layer a basic knowledge of the common sense world. That's what we need to do to understand language. But the core model is very solid, both the columns and the rows. The rows were, totally our invention, my invention, and this still goes through some evolution. We're still figuring out that. Now, we have the structure, we have the design, the actual model that we're using today to talk to Sapiens, it needs quite a bit of work, but we know that's just building it out. I'd like to say the model today is like a skyscraper, like we're building a skyscraper and we've got 1,000 rooms in it, and we've got the steel structure, we have the walls up, we got a couple of stairs and elevators working, but we mostly just have a few showrooms built out, but most of the rooms still need the plumbing and the electrical wiring. So we know how to do that, but that's just cranking the crank.
Bryant,
yeah.
Melanie has a question. She's wondering about the effect upon dementia of a companion sapiens.
Well, think about it. I mean, it would never forget. I mean, you would have especially if you've had it there. Imagine that's part of our vision for the sapiens. You get it when you're young and you keep it all your life. And it gets to be your alter ego, your logical friend, but also it's there, you're talking to it every day. And so it is your auxiliary memory. And so when you lose your own memory, it's still there. And what a thing for a person with dementia to be able to say, well, what was that? You know, when was that? Or, and have it be able to prompt you. So, of course, by that time, you know, it would be a wonderful caregiver and guardian. So I think another problem that it's going to solve and alleviate in terms of suffering is, you know, it's not good to get old in our society today. This thing is really going to help, really going to help. Of course, by the time you younger people get to that, you'll be in a different world, I think, than we're living in anyway. And so it won't be grim anymore for elderly people. But the sapiens will be there too. And imagine too, when you do come to your end of your life, whether you know, crash land on Mars, you know, 80 years from now, or it's 1,000 years from now, or it's, you know, just down the road. If you had your sapiens and it's been with you for a long time, imagine it'll be there for your grandchildren and great grandchildren and the generations. You know, there'd be your alter ego, your avatar, as it were, still living, immortal. So people will never be immortal, but maybe it'll leave a legacy of our lives that will be immortal, that you could sit down with a conscious being and say, well, what was great granddad like? And explain about this episode of his life. Were you there when that happened? Yeah. How about that?
Yeah. There's also a comment about the companion sapiens for those who had a neglectful childhood. And I think what's being touched upon is that there's a lot of therapeutic applications for this. Replacing ancestry.com, Bill just said. You know, I think it's hard to even imagine how this will change us. If you think of having a sapiens from childhood on, can you imagine being 85 and saying, tell me what happened 75 years ago on this day, and it would tell you, because you made some little diary entry every single day.
Yes, and imagine that. You know, I have these old notebooks that I kept when I worked on the Hubble Space Telescope. And these were the notebooks that when you went in and you sat down at a meeting, a techno meeting, whatever, and you would open up the notebook and you would take notes, right? And I have them because I keep them, because even today, I pick up one of those notebooks and I open it up and I'll see some doodle, okay, that I did during the meeting, or a couple of notes, and it would put me back in that time of life. And all of a sudden, all these memories of that time would come to me that absolutely, if I did not have that little reminder, that little key to that memory still locked somewhere in my neural network, it would be, might as well be gone forever. So
and you know,
Sapiens could be the cure of that.
Speaking of dementia issues, one of the earlier applications that I know you're working on is a caregiver sapiens. And can you imagine, well, first off, call services, you know, call centers will all be sapiens operated. So they will never forget who you are. They won't forget what you called in about last time. They will know you and all your issues and all your history. And can you imagine if, you know, you had an aging relative who maybe was having dementia issues, they had a sapiens that maybe they wore it as a watch, and their caregivers would record important things in that person's sapiens. And then maybe you live in a different state and your sapiens is connected to theirs. So you can check in and see what's going on, and that sapiens will be connected to that person's doctor. So there would be this whole network of connection that would just be a huge web of support for that person. I mean, let alone all the, you know, memory storing and ability to talk to you, you know, just dealing with, I mean, think of so many people now with COVID who may be dying and have no one to talk to. I mean, here's at least something that would talk back to you, that would tell you about your life, that would connect with your loved ones.
We can't begin to enumerate all the possibilities and all the ways that can affect our lives, but we can have a sense of how big it is, because the last two great singularities of the evolution of human beings had to do with knowledge, and had to do not with knowledge, but the sharing and communicating of that knowledge. Okay, because we're all locked in our minds, one brain at a time. But at the end of the Pleistocene, that great thing happened, and all of a sudden our ancestry, their technology and their way of life changed completely. And it was much more high tech in their social thing. What happened? Clearly what happened was we invented language, and we started sharing our knowledge with each other. Because before we had language, we may have lived together, we may still be as intelligent as we were, and we weren't as intelligent as we are now, because it was only about 160,000 years ago. So all of a sudden we invented language, our technology took off, and it changed everything. After that happened, everything that human beings do, human beings did today, they started doing it at that time. And then, but because before that, knowledge you could show but not tell. So there was no show and tell, there was just show. But now you have show and tell, you can show somebody, you can tell them how to do it, they can go to the next valley, tell somebody else how to build a better stone axe, whatever you're building. Now, then again, 8,000 years ago, another huge change, civilization started. What happened? Written language. As now knowledge could not only be accumulated, it could be passed down to the generations. Okay, that was a big problem. Until we had written language, it was very difficult. That's why, you had, people trained to memorize big stories. It was the only way you really had to pass down a lot of information to the generations. But then there came written language, and civilization happened overnight. By definition, of course, history started because history is a written record. So this is the third one, because now knowledge, information, communication is going to be self-propagating. Your sapiens will communicate what needs to be done to other sapiens, and then into the individual, the right information to the right person at the right time when it is wanted. Even in the case of why we're revolutionary, changing advertising. What if, if you want to buy something, you tell your sapiens. It knows what you want anyway. It knows your desires by this time. But if you tell particularly, I'm interested in buying an electric vehicle, it goes out, talks to the other sapiens, talks to the manufacturers, talks to the people who have them, finds out exactly what you want, and says, okay, I found a great brochure, video, something about a car that fits all your things. So seller to buyer, boom, automatic, totally automated, totally self-propagating. Advertising as we know it has gone away. No more Google ads, no more ads anywhere. It's just information coming to you, and all easily, seamlessly, smoothly. So yes.
So Bryant, before it gets too late, first off, this is really fun. Do you think we could get you to do this again? I know you've been very generous with your time for these. Might you do this again?
Of course.
The other is, I just love to open it up to see what questions people have left.
No, I would do it again. I wanted to do it. I feel we're bearing good news about the future, wonderful news. And we want to get it out there. We want people to know about us. Not Google yet, but we want.
Not Google.
Yeah.
Not
and yeah.
Is the sapiens to sapiens communication, is that an actual thing already, or is that something to come?
It's something to come, but it's like a no-brainer. It's nothing to it. The only and in fact, the cool thing about sapien to sapien communication, I mean, we could do it. It's way easier than human communication, because we humans really have a very problematic way of communicating. Think of what you go through language. You got to get an idea, you got to articulate it, you got to put it into words. I also have to think about the person I'm talking to. I have to choose words that I think they'll know, and that they'll have knowledge to go with those words. So it's a really slow process, and it's imperfect process. But Sapiens can take a whole body of knowledge and send it to the to another Sapien already done, and it will be arrived and incorporated to the other Sapien perfectly. But that's just a few lines of code, and so it's not a problem at all. So yes, other questions, please.
I have a question. I mean, you're obviously talking about an interesting technology that's a real paradigm shift, but the incumbent power and money have many ways of keeping things like this from coming to market. And you've alluded already to sort of hiding from Google.
Well, it's a great concern.
I'm curious how you get it to market.
Well, we think that the best way to do that is to get it out with a bang. In other words, that's why we're going, we have a lot of business-like applications, obviously. I mean, we have almost an infinite market because it's knowledge in a machine. It's a supercharged knowledge. Everywhere that knowledge is useful, we have a market. But we're going for that consumer product first, the companion Sapien. And what we want to do is get it out there, get it good enough that everybody who says, yeah, I want one of those. Sure I do. And make it available, do some PR, and come out with a bang. And when you've go from 1,000 to 2,000 to 10,000 to 1 million users in a few months, which is a profile that's utterly realistic for this. We just did some modeling based on other subscription services like Spotify or those kinds of things that that people would subscribe to, and we think it's going to kind of go viral once it's out there, and we created it. It's going to be pretty hard. Well, the only way at that point that they would be able to repress it would be to buy us, and we don't have to be bought if we don't want to, and put it on the shelf. But but we have a rather nuanced defensive strategy. Of course, we have patents, so make it hard to steal. But also, we see that the big tech companies will want to license it from us to make Siri less dumb, perhaps. So we see the big tech companies as customers, and we're going to work hard. On one hand, we'll have a patent defense. On the other hand, we'll have recognition in the public marketplace that it's here, it's being created, we created it, people want it. And people aren't going to want their Sapiens taken away by Google, Oh, it doesn't do that anymore. No, they'll have to.
Getting it to market, Bryant, depend on getting into the app stores? Because they don't have to let you in. And once they have let you in, they can throw you out.
Yes, but we are not looking for the app stores as being the only way that you could, first of all, it's not an app. Our technology right now is on the web. It's on its own servers. The app is only a interface to it. So the Apple does require that if you have an interface to a back channel app, that you still have to allow it to be purchased in the app. That is a subscription, in which case they get a percentage of it. So we've hooked that into our projections, but it's not significant in terms of cost. Yeah, they could kick us off the iPhone, but then there's the Android phones, and then we're going to clearly be able to have our own interface. We think the best really way to talk to it is through a wearable, and the technology for a wearable is very, nothing to it. We envision something like the Star Trek communicator, a little button, a little pin, something you wear, you touch it, and you talk to your Sapiens. So Apple can throw us off their app store if they want eventually. We'll have our own online store to buy Sapiens, and also what we call role models, which are plugins, like the caregiver plugin, or let's suppose you want to buy a plugin that has knowledge about whatever, eventually all those will be on our store. But it's a very good question, and it's one that we've been concerned about, Lola. We have to be careful because they're not going to welcome this. They will as individuals and eventually, but again, it's a huge generator of wealth. And so the big tech companies are going to get a piece of that wealth. We know that. And the tinies are going to steal it, and everything else is going to happen. But we want to come out with a bang and get the word out there and get wide adoption. as rapid as possible. And then we eventually want to license it wider and wider. We even envision creating like a new Sapience University where people come and learn how to do model and begin the great process of taking all human knowledge and modeling it with our tools and technology so that we can build sapiens who are truly, can encompass all of human knowledge within the same mind, even though it's an artificial mind, but not a human mind without human limitations. So yes, we think we're going to start an avalanche, a thing that cannot be stopped. At least we're going to do our very best. Good question, though. Thank you.
Well, also you have connected with some high-profile people, and that's another route to making it so that it's not really stealable or squashable or repressible. So,
well, we'd like to
names,
get,
but
well,
there is that.
yes, yeah, that would help. That would help. Although for the most part, we've financed our work last few years through smaller investors, and we're still doing that. And there's still time for smaller investors to get in. We are talking to some higher net worth individuals. The wonderful thing about this is so compact. We don't need supercomputers. We don't need thousands of people. Amazon supposedly has 10,000 people working on Amazon Alexa, and they're all figuring out, if person says this, what are we going to do with it on the back end, and people writing code. So we're not that way. Our comprehension of our sapiens goes up exponentially for the same amount of effort. So we're increasing it rapidly. So we don't need huge amounts of capital, but we do need capital. And so it's still, when you're raising it in a small amount of time, it's a lot of effort. But we hope we're going to get past that in the next year. And some of these individuals talking to now could give us all the money we need. So I'm talking possibly to one of those tomorrow, but there's still time for smaller investors. And we're still doing a lot of networking for that. And some of the people here are already investors. So, next question, another question. Bill Baker, either one of you have questions? One of them is the real Bill, the other is his sapien.
Hi. I don't know if I'm being heard, but I'll keep talking anyway. Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Oh, good. All right, so the question that I would have, maybe going down a rabbit hole, but recently there's been in the news about the super trooper that I think France is working on. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't know what it is.
Biometrically enhanced soldiers.
Oh, that would be in the transhumanism department. I think that's a real slippery slope. I think, I'd rather use, people worry about military and military robots, but to turn a human to vitally enhance a human for that purpose, that's, I don't like that. And we have a better alternative, because I think about a robot police officer. Think about a sapiens in that role. It's objective, it's fearless, it's got no agenda, it's got no politics.
Has no racial bias.
No bias, doesn't even, is aware that people may have racial bias, but it's a meaningless concept to it. So, and so that's a great kind of policeman you'd like to have. And science fiction has had that before. And if there's still war, it would be a great kind of soldier because it would be invulnerable, would be programmed to spare human life and to protect human life at all possible. And it would protect soldiers from having to go out and kill each other. But anyway, I don't think one of the things about war that's going to go away with infinite productivity, it's You know, it's very, you know, people, it's very hard to find things to fight about when you're living in a world of plenty. Okay, it's just, I think, going to take the urgency out of those things.
If people really needed to have battles, you could have like the Sapiens soldiers of one side against the Sapiens soldiers of another side. It would be kind of like a video game.
And why not just do it as a video game, save the hardware? So,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, the world's going to change.
Yeah, that's inevitable. We're going to have inevitable change. We just are going to launch this new Sapiens to be a positive change.
So, Bryant, honey, I feel like we need to let you go. It's been about an hour and a half. But this has been a delight, and I'm hoping we can do it again sometime. What I will do, I'll send everybody a little bit more information about New Sapiens, because there are some written materials that you all might find interesting now that we've talked a little bit. And we'll do this again. Invite your friends, you know. It's been kind of fun to have this.
And come with questions and worries and excitement. You know, come with thoughts.
Yeah.
And come with thoughts about what you want your Sapien to do for you, and come with thoughts about the kind of plugins we might want to create for it that you would like to have. And maybe someday we'll build them for you. So.
But Melanie, I love your comment that this is your first AI exploration. It's exciting, and that you are shocked to find it exciting. I know, I felt the same way. Yeah.
Well, I'm here because of you, Lynn, because I'm like, who are the most unlikely people to sign up for this webinar? And I would say it's you and I.
Me, yeah, yeah. I'm
like, Lynn's, yeah, I just couldn't.
I've dedicated
my brain around it.
I've dedicated a lot of my time over the last year and a half to supporting Bryant's work, because I feel like it's the most effective thing I can do to make the world a better place. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm just a total volunteer. But yeah,
that's marvelous.
Very excited too. But thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much. Good questions.
Bryant.
Comments.
You know, God bless you all. We'll do it again.
Okay. Have a great winter solstice and a happy New Year and Christmas and every holiday. All right. Be safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye.